So again, welcome to day 4 of our Intro to Android course. This is going to start wrapping up some of the really basics, and next week we can dive into more Android-centric topics. Today we're going to be talking about methods and how methods allow us to reuse code and distribute responsibilities across multiple modules. So our objectives for today: upon completion of this module, you'll be able to write and call simple methods, return a value from a method, write methods that accept and use parameters, overload methods, and accept text input from the user in Android. Today's project is one of the more complicated ones, but we've finally gotten back into do Android apps. What we're going to do is we're going to write a guessing game where the user has to guess a secret number that you're going to hard code. So you'll just set it as a data member and set the number manually. And then after every guess, the program will tell the user whether the number they guessed was too large or too small. There are 2 methods that I want you to include. One that's check guess, and it'll check to see if the number is correct, and then one that will update the user interface. And we'll use switch statements from yesterday in the update user interface one. And then the challenges will be to, instead of hard code it, like we said here, we'll have you randomly generate it. So it becomes more of a fun game that you don't have to change the number every time you compile the code. When the users correctly guess the number, allow them to reset. So give them a button or a state or something that can let them start over and generate a new number. And then also, again, experiment with your text views and GUI implementations. So let me show you what this app's going to look like. So this is the version that I built. This one does perform these challenges here. You can see I've manipulated the size of the text, the alignment to make it look a little bit better. I've also added these 2 fields right here that will record the last guess. So you can see here, the user will enter a number. Oh, well, first they reset it. Now they'll enter the number. Enter the number again. And you can see here what I'm doing is the range of the numbers is from 0 to 100, and that's something you can configure and would be good to display to the user. Something I could probably improve here. The first time I guessed 50 and it was too high. So I guessed 25 and that was too high. So I guessed 13 and that was too high. So each time I'm cutting my guess in half. So from 100 to 50, 50 to 25, 25 to 13. And now we'll do 13 to 6. And that was too low. So I know the numbers between 6 and 13. So let's do 9. That's about halfway between. That's too high. So if you do 8, there we go. So this is called a binary search, because each time you're splitting the possible results, the whole pool, into 2 separate or binary options. So it's either going to be too low or too high. And if you split them evenly each time, you can find things much faster. In fact, if you did this app with a range from 0 to 1,000, it would take you at the very most, 10 guesses to reach that. So you can whittle down from 1,000 down to your correct number in 10 guesses. And that shows you the efficiency of binary search. And in fact, that's a big tool that developers use to search large amounts of data, is a binary search. So it's just a cool tidbit on that. But anyway, you'll have built this during the project tonight. It's a fun little app, and finally you'll have a game that you can kind of play around with. And we've moved away from the Replit and Google Forms, since those are really just exercises so you can ingrain some of these basic principles. But we'll be using methods with this, so you have to have these 2 methods, and we'll dig into that a little bit more and look at the repo that has some more tips on that. So the goal here, the first objective, is that you can write and call simple methods, and you can understand what methods are. So methods are blocks of code that are used to perform specific tasks, and they can be performed multiple times and called from different places in your code. This allows for code specialization and modularization. It's kind of like the the flow chart that I showed you yesterday, and I should have had that up now. I'll make sure to do that for next time. But each of the boxes wasn't necessarily a line of code. It was, okay, I want you to do this, which is going to be multiple lines of code, but you can do that with a method. So your code can more resemble that flowchart rather than 1,000 lines of code straight up. You'll break them into 25 lines or 5 lines or whatever, and it'll be easier to see so you can abstract away those things. For example, a big switch statement. If you were to say something like, for our examples yesterday, when you were finding the student's grade, instead of having that all in the main method, you can, with methods, you can say, okay, I'm going to get a grade, and I'm going to create a method that will tell me which grade in letter grade a student received, and it'll return that out, and that'll abstract away. I don't know how to, from the main method, I don't need to know how that's done. I just know it gets done. And that's a cool way to do that. And it makes it really easy, a lot easier to follow code. And you can also see from flowcharts, if you remember this symbol, the subroutine symbol, is how you tell what a method, you tell it that's a method. So let's look at this. This is called a method's signature. And this is a basic one. This is about as basic as it'll get. And you have these multiple parts. So let's dig into each of them. First, you have its visibility. Public allows a method to be called from outside of this class. And this will go deeper into public and private when we talk about classes next week. You have the static keyword. That means that this method doesn't have to be part of a class. And again, in classes next week, we'll dig deeper into that. Your main method that you, in Replit, where you write a lot of your code, is a static method. So in order to call other things, they have to be static as well. And now here you have the name. A method name, like variable names, needs to be unique and specific. It describes what the method does in just a couple of words. And again, from the example yesterday, remember when I wrote get controllers? And I said, well, this actually is just doing one controller at a time. So that's one of the things that'll help you improve. In fact, there was an issue that I ran into. There was a company that had contracted out with some developers to write an app to communicate with a device, a printer style device. And it, if I remember correctly, there was a method that was called send print command or send execute command or whatever. So I think that that's supposed to send a specific command. And there's some bug that no one can find. So I dig into it and I spend hours and hours and days trying to find this bug and dig into it. And finally, after hours of looking at it, I realized that the method didn't send that specific command. It was a method to send any command. And that was something that was able to help me figure out how this app was working and how it was communicating with the device. And I was able to finally pinpoint what the issue was. So if they would have given it a decent name, like just send command rather than send specific command, that would have been a lot easier to debug when you are looking for somewhere that communicates this. And this was an app that was tens of thousands of lines of code with hundreds of files. So it was a pretty complicated app. And that one little name would have just saved our customer thousands of dollars in costs to have us dig through that and try and figure it out. So that's another way that you can distinguish between a developer and a great engineer, is somebody that thinks about these and makes sure that you have your names named correctly. And you'll make mistakes every once in a while, but just being able to, as a rule, have clearly thought out and good names, that's going to be very helpful to you. So now I went on that rant. Finally, after your name, down here, you have the body of the method. Any code that goes here is executed in this method when it is called. And this is how you call the method. You do the method name and the parentheses. And that is how you execute it. So when you go through your code, it says, okay, I see this. I'm going to jump down here and start executing these things. So let's go back and let's do some demo. Bring up Replit. I'll give you just a little bit of time to do that. I want you to follow along with me. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to come down here. Oh, you know what I did? Let's get a new REPL. Actually, I can just do this. I'd accidentally deleted that section. That should be good if I do that. Yep, we're good there. So let's come down here. We want to keep it inside of this, still inside of this class, but outside of here. It needs to be public and static because our main, remember our main is static. So type in public, static, and we're going to do a method, just a simple method that will print out a greeting. So print greeting. And now let's print our greeting. System.out.println. Hello. Let's see, public static. Oh, I missed this. Won't be an issue with you because it created that, but you also need this return. I should clarify here, this void means that it's not going to give us anything back. It's just going to execute and not return anything. And we'll go into returns next. So you notice we have this method here and we wrote it, but it's not giving us an output. It's not doing this. It's because we haven't called it yet. So what happens here is from the command line, Java will, when you execute it, it looks for your main class, then it looks for your main method, and then it executes this code. It doesn't care about anything else. In fact, with Java, it doesn't even look at it until you execute it. So now let's try our print greeting. So we'll just say print greeting, and we'll go run. There we go. Hello. So now what it's doing, again, it looks for your main class, then your main method, then it goes print greeting, jumps down here and executes this code. And there it is. That's a simple method. And you can see now, we can do this multiple times. Whoops. Highlight that, copy, paste. I can run it, and it'll do it twice without having to redo this line. And generally, methods have more lines than just a single line. But being this just a simple demo, it can show you that we can stack these up. You can do them with loops. You can do all kinds of things in them, and you can call them from different places. And we'll see that when we experiment with Android, and we do that in your project tonight. So let's move on to the next part where I hinted on. We're going to return a value from a method. So another thing you can do, since we had void before, you remember that from this previous one, your void. If I come here, there's an int here. This is telling the system, okay, I'm going to execute this, and I'm going to return an int value. And then when you call it, see, we're calling it here, and it's returning that int value. And down here inside, if you use the return keyword, it will send it back to use however we want. So now let's change that, and let's go to, oops, there it is. Now instead of printing a greeting, let's get a greeting. Because one thing you want to do is generally you want methods to only do a single thing. And granted, getting a greeting doesn't necessarily require, in this situation, it doesn't require a method, but we'll show you a situation in a minute that does. We're going to change this void keyword to string, and string, remember, is a series of text, and we'll be diving into that next week as well, what string is and what it gives you. But we'll do the same thing, but now we're moving our print statement to out here, system.out.println, and we get greeting. So make sure you're following along with me to kind of start building your familiarity with Java. If you click run, so now what it's doing, it's saying main. Okay, I'm gonna go system out print line. Wait, I don't have anything. I need to execute this to get something to print. So I execute this and it says, okay, I'm gonna give you back a hello. So because it's looking for a string, I send it back a string. It comes here and it gives that to print line and it prints it there. Another thing you can do is we could do string, declare a string here, and we'll just do greeting equals, and we'll just move this exact chunk right here, right there, and then we'll use greeting here. And this result will be the same, but now we have this greeting to do again later on. So that's one of the things that you can do with methods is store values, move values down, do it multiple times. But let's get into something that we can get a little bit more complicated on and get something that's actually worthy of being called a method. So the next thing that methods can do is they can accept and use parameters. Parameters allow you to pass data into a method for that method to work with. Methods can only access data that is passed in as parameters in a method or in those of the methods class. And I'll show you how to show you that, and we'll demonstrate that here. The way you can do that is, remember, you have your method name, its return type. Right here are the parameters. This one only has a single parameter, and each parameter is separated by a comma. So this is an int parameter, int value, and you can see here we're giving it, when we execute it, we're going to pass in this parameter. So now let's see that in action. So now what we're going to do, let's do greetings of different languages. So we're going to change this, and it's going to accept an int value. And this is going to be our language code. And instead of just returning hello, we are going to create a string value. And this is going to be our greeting. We're going to use a switch statement like we did yesterday. So remember, if I spell it, switch. We're going to switch on our language code. And then we're going to have case 0, and that'll be our English. We'll do greeting equals hello, break, in case 1, that'll be greeting equals, and remember to follow along with me, hola, break. Now what does it not like here? It's probably just replet. Oh, a semicolon instead of a regular colon. There we go. We'll do one more. Aloha. These are all very, very similar. Looking at them all right like this. So there we go. So depending on which language code we pass in, we're going to assign greeting hello, hola, or aloha. And then our default case, oh, you know what? Let's show you something. If I do, right here, it's yelling at me because we need to return a string. So we have a string, so let's return it. Return greeting. But look at this. So we have these, we're storing it, but it says may not have been initialized, because if we pass in a code that's not any of these, it is gonna fall through. It won't go through any of these, and greeting won't have been initialized. So let's add a default case to make sure that we store it no matter what. We do default. That's caps blocks. I don't want to yellow you guys. I'm sorry. And the default case greeting is, try to think of something clever. I can't think of anything clever when I'm on stream. He's confused. We're getting confused greeting. So here we go. There's that. And now this is saying, hey, you're missing in a language code. So let's pass it in a 0. So now we'll run it. And you have hello. And now look at this. Now we've gone down from 1 line of code to what? We have 14 lines of code-ish. And all these are encapsulated in this single greeting. So now our main method is much smaller, much easier to manage, and you can easily swap out these to determine our greeting. We've cut down all this into one single line, and now we know somebody coming into the main will say, oh, get greeting. Okay, it's just going to give me a greeting. I don't care how it's done. Exactly the way we do like set text or set background color. We don't care how it's done. It's telling us that if you give me this color, I will set the color of the background to the color you give me. It's a contract that I have given you with my method signature. So you don't care. You have no clue how it's done. I don't even know how it's done. But we know that we can use it. And that's the strength of a method. Another thing we can do here, 0, 1, and 2 aren't very intuitive. And in fact, we're going to get into what these are. They're called magic numbers because we don't know what they are. They're just magic. We put in here, what is that? So let's go. What we can do here is we can add, sorry, let's go back down here. We're going to add data members. We're going to say int, and we're going to say, use all caps, English equals 0. Int OYN. I'm way spelling that wrong, and I apologize. I can't spell on stream either. Whoops. That's not even it. That's going to be a 2. Int Spanish. I can spell Spanish. 1. So now instead of just passing it a value, we can pass it. And yes, that's not capitalized. Generally, if you have constant values like this in Android, you'll have them all capitalized. Let's try and put it down here too. English, Spanish. Nope, I guess I can't spell Spanish. So let's run that. Okay, wait. So we declared these, but it says I can't find them. What's happening here is these are what's called out of scope variables. So you can see here, it works fine here. It's complaining about line 15, line 18, and line 21. So we've declared them properly, but in line 15, 18, and 21, our method can't see these because these are part of the main method. And they're out of scope. Scope means what the view that methods or anything have of variables. So you can also see how we have greeting declared here twice. And normally if you declare something twice, we've seen that it'll yell at you because you're declaring it twice. But these are separate scopes. This method has no clue about this greeting and vice versa. This greeting doesn't know anything about this greeting. So that's one thing we have to keep in mind when you're creating things like this. So what you need to do is if we go like this, we'll cut these, delete that, and paste them up here. Now instead of being scoped to this main method, they're now part of the main class. And since these methods are both part of this class, they have views of these values. But there is another issue here now. You can see here we cannot make a static reference from the we can't make a static reference to the long static field. Because this is static and this isn't, we can't use that. So what we need to do is we go static, And another keyword we'll want to use with constants is final. So your final static, final static, final static. And now these are what are called constant values. They're always there and they're easily referenced in your code. So now notice we don't have any numbers here anymore. We have codes. We have a language code that is an integer value, but as the developers, we don't have to know what the integer value is. We could change this to some crazy weird number. Well, now that's too big. Make that smaller. Crazy weird number, that's smaller than the maximum value an integer can hold. And it doesn't matter because we're not referencing the number, we're referencing this. A great use for constant fields are things like URLs. A website URL is subject to change, or an IP address that could possibly change. So if you have it set as a constant value, then you can easily change it in one place and it's distributed throughout your code. And we'll show you that when we talk about magic numbers in the next couple of assignments. But let's run this. Spanish gives us Spanish. This poorly spelled Hawaiian. There's aloha. And now if I just do 85, it's going to give us aha. So now we've expanded this out. We have something that's a bit more complex. We're passing it at a parameter. We're returning a value. And now we have our methods that are a bit more powerful. Oops. So now what I want you to do, I have a challenge for you. So let's come back here. The challenge, I want to give you a couple of minutes. I want you to write a method that will accept 3 numbers, 3 int values, and give us the smallest number. So you'll have to use some of the things that we were working on yesterday, your if and your else statements. So experiment with that, and then we'll get back to it in just a couple of minutes. While you're working on that, thanks for JD Lopez responding to Kathleen's question. Chat was invisible to me for a minute there, but yeah, you're correct. It doesn't matter. They're in different scopes, so they can't see each other. So you don't have to worry about how Google has named their variables inside of their other wherevers, because you're fine as long as you're in a different scope. Yep. The names are independent, so you name them generally with whatever is their best name. There are situations where they can possibly be confusing, and you just want to use your discretion on that. Yeah, like you said, for readability, it's up to your discretion as the developer, and you'll gain more experience with that. We'll give it a couple, just a minute or so more for this. I don't want anybody to be sitting there as long as they need to. Remember, we're going to accept 3 parameters, and in fact, I should probably do this too. Bring that down. Okay, 15 more seconds. Sorry, I'm just making sure my code works before I share it. Make sure everyone has had the time that they need. So this is what I put together. Might look a little bit different. I used ternary operators, a couple of ternary operators to do that. Since we have 3 values, we have to do 2 comparisons. So you can see here, you create, generally with comparisons, especially if you have multiple, you'll need to create a value to store your smallest. And then you can just store it. If is A less than B, if so, store A. If not, store B. The same thing. If small is less than C, then return small and return C. And we can do random numbers. The format's all weird, but and there you go. It returned the smallest one with the smallest one being C. So you can see how we can do more complicated things in methods and they'll look small. They'll look simpler up here. It's even more of a benefit when they're in like separate files or things like that, because you can see that you don't need to worry about what it is or how it does it. We just know that this tells me I'll get the smallest and then it's going to give me the smallest. So let's go one more detail about methods. Methods can be overloaded. Whoops, it's in the wrong order. So methods can do different things based on what is passed into them. This is called method overloading. You see these 3 methods all have the same name, and but they accept different parameters or different combinations of parameters. These all do different things. So you can see here that it's a bool. If you pass in a bool, this one will be executed. Pass in an int, this one will be executed. Pass in both, this one will be executed. And that's one way you can show. You can again obfuscate from the user the differences. It can just say, hey, my method is going to find the smallest whatever. And then you'll pass it in there and it will do it. So let me show you an example. And this time we won't use my code. We're going to go to some Android documentation. Let's do something we've used before, text view. So if we go home, this is what you'll see when you go into developer.android.com and you find text view. This is the documentation that describes how the text view runs. So you can see here it's XML attributes. So can you see some of the ones that you've worked with before? We get down here, we get your height. We've set a height before. We have set its text value before. And we've set its width before. But see all these different things you can do. So this is a great resource to look at it, to kind of see what you can do. If you want more details, you can always just click it and it'll describe, makes the text view to be exactly this tall. And that's a great way to work through that. So now let's find our set text. So that's something we've worked with. So Control F, we'll do a find set text. Look, there they all are. Look at all these different, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 different methods that are all overloaded to be the same thing. Or they have the same name, but they do different things. So this is where you pass it your resource ID. So just like so it'd be r.string, and you give it an ID. And that's something we'll work on throughout the course as well as resource files. But you can see there's multiple. You can pass a sequence of characters or a string. You can pass it a combination and it'll work on things differently. This will change the type of buffer, so how the text is stored, and a character array, and you can specify if you want it to start. So let's say you have an array of characters, or sorry, let's just call it a list of characters, and you can start in the middle and end somewhere in the middle. So you can do all of these different things, and they all have the same name. So that clearly identifies to the user, yes, these all will set the text, and they're overloaded to do it in separate ways. So if you have something that needs to perform the same task in multiple different ways, that's when you'll want to overload the method, because it's less confusing, it's more straightforward to the user to say, okay, all of these will do the same thing, they just go about it differently. So let's do an example of that. Okay, I got an idea. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to, instead of an integer language code, we're going to do public. We're going to follow along with me, bring this one back up. String get reading, but instead of an integer language code, we're going to pass it a string language. So now what we need to do is we need to implement the same thing. So we need to give it back the same values, but if they give us a string. So how would we do that? Do you think we would? Can we do a switch? Would a switch work? In fact, I can't remember if switches work with strings. Let's try it. Case. So if we copy and paste here, these, and we change these all to strings, so let's see how that works. Instead of this, now we're going to pass it the string. I'm keeping it capitalized just to save time here. Can't find symbol. Oh, yep, you guys probably noticed that too. So I didn't string. I swear I can type better than this, but for some reason this microphone, return reading. So there you go. So now we can pass it in an int or a string and it'll do the same thing. But look at this. This is great, but we literally copied and pasted code and made a couple of tiny tweaks. And this is bad coding practice. Having two blocks of code be so similar. What happens if I want to add a language? Or even better, what if I wanted to change? What if I want to do hello world? Now I have to change it in both places as well. So one thing that you can do with overloaded methods is, instead of performing the task completely again from scratch, we can massage the parameters that are given us and call this method. So let's try that. What if I just do, instead of greeting, we'll do int code. And we're going to change this. Instead of it giving it the greeting, we're going to give it the code. Code equals English. So this method, instead of reinventing the wheel or reinterpreting the same code, we're going to convert our string input into something that the integer method can understand. And the same thing here, we'll just do our code equals -1. And that's a general way you can kind of show errors, and that would be a good thing to add up here. So let's add another constant, final static int error. That way, we don't have to have it up here, but that way we can see, I can easily reference it with this code, and we can easily see if it conflicts with any of our known values. And then finally, instead of returning a greeting, what we're going to do is we're going to call our get greeting, and we're going to pass it in our code. And then we're going to turn that value. So now we've done a chain. Let's grab this. So what's happening here is main calls main calls get greeting, but it's the string value that's getting called. So we have this string here, and in fact, that'd be a good thing to do. Let's copy this. We're going to say, so we can log this. Int method, copy that, paste that here, string method. Let's see it again. So here it is, main to main, main to string method. So it pops into here. It says, okay, well, this is a string parameter. I want to convert that to an int code. So we're going to take our string language and we're going to convert that into our language code. So we can convert that. Now we can pop back here. And now what's doing is get greeting. Now we're passing into the code, so it's going to call this. So now we go here. I change this to English. And I run that. It's going to go through, and instead of doing the hello that we had here before, it's going to go all the way into hello world. So that gives you a little bit of power into the parameters or into the methods. Because now I can just swap this out. If I want to pass it the code, if I have the code, because sometimes what's going to happen is you'll have something that wants to get a greeting. But in some part of your app, you'll have a code. In other parts of the app, you'll have a string. And being able to translate between those two will be powerful and allow you to do that. See, we're just here, we passed it at the int, and then we called hello world. Or sorry, we passed it the int, called the int one. Now it's the hello world there. So now you don't have to re-implement the same code. This is just going to translate that. And even though it's the same length, it's still 15 lines of code, but it's much better because it's not the same code. If that makes sense. Hopefully I've beat that dead horse enough. This is the big key. I can easily re-implement this and be the same, but having one source of truth, just like our constants up here, we have one source of truth. We don't have to check the numbers, make sure all the numbers are good. Here we don't have to check our strings and make sure our text's all correct. This is our single source of truth that all other methods will point to. That's a powerful tool that's going to get really far. In fact, another example, even from the same app, this app, what they had to do is they had to communicate with a server. So what they would do is the user would log in, it would communicate with the server. The user would say, I want information for this type of device. It would communicate that with the server. It would send that up to the server. Then I says, okay, I performed this task for this device. Send that up to the server. It did that in separate methods each time. So there were like 4 or 5 different methods that all, and each method was over 100 lines of code that did the same thing. So out of the 100 lines, 90 of them were exactly the same. So rather than having a send to server method that would just do the things slightly different and then go to the single source of truth, they had to implement the server communication 4 or 5 times to be able to do that. And that's something that, again, took a lot of time for them to write. And then when I came in to try and debug it, it wouldn't work. Or it worked, but if I wanted to add something, I wanted to add another state that it would communicate. I wanted it to say, I can't even remember. It wanted to check for validation. So what I had to do, because I couldn't, none of their methods were generic enough for me to reuse, I had to write my own. So then we added a 6th or a 7th one to that. So it just makes your code so, and then anytime you want to change the way that communication process works, so let's say they added you've seen a lot of sites do this lately, go from HTTP to HTTPS, or maybe they change the format of their URLs, the address up here. If they change the format of this, you have to do that in a bunch of different places rather than just one and having that be the one source of truth. And that's another disadvantage. Another thing you want to watch out for. So I've gone off track again, but hopefully these are really helpful for you. I think they will be. If you keep these in mind, you'll be a great developer. So now finally, let's get to something a little bit more fun. We're going to jump into Android. We're going to accept text input from the user. So now working on your upload assignments, you've at least seen how text input is done on the command line. In fact, the first version of this project was all command line, but it wasn't nearly as fun of having an Android app. And you guys are signed up to learn Android. So Dr. Garnet, you're going to learn Android. If I can speak English. That's always a challenge sometimes. Okay, so the way you do this, in command line, use a scanner. But in this, what we're going to do is you'll use your edit text component. So like a text view, it's edit text. In the same way, you find the view by ID. So you have to put an ID in your XML code. And then you add that here. You're finding your view by your ID. And what it's going to do is you're going to get the text. And let's go to documentation to see. Because it's always good to see documentation. It's not necessarily fun, but it will be helpful because there's no possible way I can teach you everything to do with Android. Not in 6 months, not in 6 years. So let's dig into it. Here we go. Here's our method. So we want to find something that will give us text. Get text. Let's click on that and see. Again, this is in developer.android.com and reference. And you can just search for edit text right here. And let's do that to show you how it's done. Whoops. Edit text. And you can see here Android widget edit text. So we come down here and there we go. That's the same page that we were on. So I come down here, edit text. So this will return the text that the text view is displaying. And you see it's text view. It's not necessarily just an edit text. So if I go back up here, this will work for our text view because this also has come up here. This one has a lot more methods. In fact, control find get text. And there you go. That will get us the text that the text view is showing. So you can do that either way. And you can use that, in fact, with a button. And hint, hint, that's something that could be useful in your assignment is setting the text of the button and getting the text of the button to show its state. Just like you've seen music player apps like Spotify and all these other ones that will be, you press when it's a triangle and it'll play and then it changes to a pause. You can do that same thing with text. In fact, I'll do that with animations later on, but text can do that and you can check the state of that to be able to see what state your app is in and also communicate with that user so they don't have to have multiple buttons. Anyway, we get our text, but what this does is it gives us an editable. And in order to change the editable, we need to use the toString method. So let's go back here and we'll show you how it's done. So we use our edit entry, which is our edit text. We're going to get the text, which gives us an editable object, and we're going to do toString on that. So let's jump into Android Studio, create a new project, and play around with that. So here we go. And we'll just give it whatever you want to name, edit text demo. Next, 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 finish. So while it's processing this, do you guys have any questions on anything that we've covered so far today? And then, so think about that, type that into the chat. And while we're compiling our code to execute, which will take a minute or two, I'll see if I can address any of those questions. Okay, so we're letting the build run, indexing. It's good to go. So here, simply, we'll just change this to a edit text. We're going to also change this to a linear layout. Less complicated than a constraint layout. And we're going to add, a lot of you had noted that a linear layout by default will lay things out horizontally. And then if you add a orientation vertical, it's going to rotate that and they'll orient themselves vertically along the screen, so you can take advantage of that, the screen real estate. And in fact, since it's linear, we don't need this anymore. Whoops. Delete that. And also one thing you'll want to add with your edit text is you want to add a button, because we want to be able to wrap the content. We want the user to be able to tell us, okay, I'm done typing. I'm ready for you to grab the text. And remember, both of these will need IDs. Edit demo ID plus ID button demo. And there we go. So now that we got both of those, let's, oh no, the preview's not gonna work. Sorry, I clicked the button and it's hanging for a second. Hide that so we don't worry about it. We're gonna execute this. Boot up your virtual device and go back home while we wait for it to build and execute. Were there any questions on there? Okay, so it seems like it's going pretty well so far. A lot of you are probably really bored with this, especially if you have experience with developing. But I'm sure I can bet that there are a few things that you hadn't thought about that we went over. So let's see here. Building. There we go. Installing. So what we're doing is, remember when I said the day one, put one foot in front of the other? We added the edit text, we added the button, but you notice here our button's blank. We didn't say anything to the user. Let's go ahead and add a text parameter to our button. And we're going to say submit. Whoops. Delete that. Quote there. There we go. So that's going to say submit. And also, you can also see that we can manipulate this text. But it's really tiny. The line's really tiny until we get to the end. That's because we used wrap content. So as the content grows, the field's going to grow. So I want to do two things. First of all, I want to get rid of our text here because I don't want my edit text field. In fact, let's try this. Experiment with something. It's always good to experiment when you're on live stream in front of a bunch of people, right? I'm changing that text to a hint. See what happens there. Oh, that's probably not gonna work. If I delete, whoops, don't want to delete that. I want to delete in here. Let's actually click this one. So what the lightning bolt will do, it'll restart your activity, but it'll keep your input. And I want to see what happens when I do that. Oh, so there we go. We have a hint. So you can see here that's grayed out. And as soon as I type, it disappears. It's a hint, or in HTML, I believe it's a placeholder. But that's kind of a cool. So you just say, enter your text here. Ooh, I can't pass that up. And then one thing we'll do too is, I don't like how small these things up are in the corner. So instead of wrapping content, let's use the match parent width. In fact, we can look at our documentation again. Let's go to our text view. We're going to go home. We're going to go find width. I'm going to look for the width method. Set width? No. I want to go all the way up here. Let's scroll back down. These alphabeticals, let's see that. Set width int. Let's see if it's going to give us any constants there. Oh, that's related. Exactly this wide, so you can set it to be this wide. I'm going to do find match underscore parent. So there we go. It's giving us a parent there. Is it going to tell us? Nope, it's going to show us. So this is an example of match parent, but it's not going to show us where it's defined. That'd be a good thing to investigate. where those are defined. As soon as we rebuild this, I should bring up our demo. There you go. See, now these are wide. Now we made them wider and they fill up the screen, so they use the real estate a little bit better, but we don't have anything else, so we can't really do much vertically. But enough side, making things pretty. I bet you find too that you spend too much time trying to make things pretty. I do anyway. I come from a design background. So anyway, let's add our parameters. And that's going to be our edit demo. Our button is going to be our button demo. And we're going to Alt Enter to import that. Okay. Now I was experimenting with this the other day. But I can't remember if this is default. You Alt K, you should come up with a second caret, or if you highlight this and Alt J, it'll do 2 carets right there. Control Shift left will highlight just that. I'm not sure how to do that on Mac OS. I am sorry. But if you copy that, now you can escape and get back to 1 caret or 1 cursor. Alt K to duplicate it again. If I paste there, now I'm editing 2 lines at once. Find view by ID, r.id dot. Remember, my naming convention was pretty uniform. So if I do that, I can delete underscore D end semicolon. So we just assigned 2 parameters, just doing it 1 time. And that's the beauty of multi-cursor. Doing that, that's really helpful and can save time. Let's go now. We're going to add a on-click listener. Button demo dot set on-click listener. And that's going to be new view to on-click listener. There we go. It populates that. Don't you love IDEs? It saves so much time. If it didn't, remember the first time I tried this, or I tried this during the first lesson, it didn't auto-populate. You can always just delete it again and try it again. It could just be that the IDE missed that hook. It was busy with something else. But now what we want to do is we want to take our edit demo dot get text, and you can see here, do the dot, it'll bring up your prompt again. We have get text, and it's going to give us an editable object. And that's not a description of you can edit this object. That's just the name of it. Get text, and then we need to go semicolon, go home. We're going to do a new string, and it's going to be content equals. So you can see here it's yelling at us. It's saying, hey, these are incompatible. You can't give, I'm looking for a string. You can't give me an editable. So click here. So we can change the variable to an editable, and it'll do that for us. See what else it'll give us. So this little light bulb here just gives you suggestions. You can wrap using string value of. So that's kind of cool. It's converting that, and that'll be helpful. So now it's converted our editable object to a string object that we can manipulate now. So now again, let's use another tool from Monday, our log. Log.i. We're going to do demo, comma, and we're just going to give it the content. And again, it's yelling at us here, we need to import that. So let's just actually type it. So we come here, import Android. I'm glad it was showing me that. .util. Log. No, it needs to be capital. Log. So we're importing that library so that we can use it. These import statements up here make it so that your code, when it's compiled, isn't as bloated, because we can limit what the other resources that we're using to this, and we can just keep adding more things. So you can add button text. I see we don't have a text view, so we can't do anything with text views until we add that. When we type these in, it prompted us to add it again. So let's try this. So now what we're doing is we have our text here. We're going to, when the user presses the button, it's going to grab that value. So let's try it. Let's go to debug mode, because we'll want to do some debugging. While it's compiling, we can bring up our log. Holy cannoli. I thought I would be short this time. I just love this stuff, I guess. So we change, filter that by demo, go to, see if I do D, there we go, capital D demo. That'll filter everything else out. I submit. Oh, I didn't put any text, so it couldn't log anything. This is our text. Submit. And there you go. There's our demo code. One thing, last thing, and then we'll go over the project and let you go. You'll want to not only get a string, but you want to be able to get an integer value when you're comparing the size. So what you'll have to do is you'll do int value equals, and we're going to take our content and we need to convert that to an int value. To do that, we're going to use our integer object because it provides us something called parse. So parse int, we're going to give it our content, and we're going to go to our semicolon. And now this is a value. So if you looked here before, if I go int num equals content times 5, but you can't use a multiplier operator there. But now that I've converted it to an int, I can do int, or I can just do num equals value times 6. And there it's fine. It'll multiply that and it'll store that there and you'll be good to go. So you want to definitely do that for the assignment tonight. So there you go. We did methods. In fact, let's step back through here. So we were able to write and call simple methods. We added return values to that. Then we added parameters to that to get more complicated methods. After that, we overloaded methods by accepting different parameters to do similar tasks in perhaps different ways. And then we accepted text input from our user in Android. Let's jump into the project. We're going to jump into the Git repo. So you want to have your check guess method, and it's going to check to see if the number is correct, and we're returning an integer value. Update UI will take this integer value that you've returned here and adjust the display accordingly. You should use a switch statement like we did with our languages. You'll want to do something like that to be able to do that display. And one advantage of using this update UI method is that you can change the way it updates the UI. Let's say you want to add an image. So it'll update a message and an image. You can do that here without changing anything else, and it's fine. Another thing I want to show you is this. These are content. These will be codes just like we did with our languages. Our languages here. You'll want to put these up there so that you can easily reference these, and you can start doing that. And then again, as a challenge, I want you to do random. In a couple of minutes, I'll update this to show you, give you a little bit more code to work with and show you how to generate a random number. So that's it for tonight. I'm going to let you go to your PMs and start working on your project. Thank you all for participating. I really appreciate it. And I did a little bit better on time today, but it's just, I like showing you this and I like taking advantage of that. So it's been great working with you. Remember, tomorrow we don't have class. So I will see you again on Monday when we're going to talk about something else. Have a good one.